Okay, I think it's worth taking a few minutes and talking about a fossil-fueled plant and a nuclear plant and some of the advantages and disadvantages of each. So we'll just consider these one at a time. Some advantages of a fossil-fueled plant and advantages of a nuclear plant, and I'll just make a little chart here, and some disadvantages of each one, because there's trade-offs involved either way you go. Okay, first look at this fossil-fueled plant. Remember one of the things we said, if you burn your coal or oil or natural gas, you're putting pollution into the air. So that's a disadvantage of a fossil fueled plant. We'll write air pollution here. And that would correspondingly be an advantage of a nuclear plant. There's no air pollution. Okay, there's a corresponding disadvantage though for the nuclear plant. Everything in the core here that is decaying, every few years they dump all that out and replace it. And the spent core is what they call high-level nuclear waste. And when they drain the primary coolant and replace that, that's what they call low-level nuclear waste. But whether it's high-level or low-level, you don't want to mess with it. It's dangerous stuff. And it's produced by a nuclear plant, and they have to dispose of that. And there's no good way to dispose of it. They can put it into some containers and bury it underground, or dump it in containers in the bottom of the ocean and hope that the containers don't leak. But it's very difficult to deal with. And so you have to have a facility where you can store this, where if it does leak, it's not going to leak in a place where it can get into the groundwater where people would end up drinking it. But the nuclear waste is a real problem. And that's consequently an advantage of a fossil fueled plant, is there's no nuclear waste. Okay, another disadvantage of the nuclear plant associated with the nuclear aspect of it is there's risk of accident. We mentioned the accident at Chernobyl. If there's a problem here, some kind of catastrophic failure inside the reactor core, and all of that radioactive material gets into the environment, it's very bad. If there's a problem at a fossil fueled plant, problems there can be devastating too. You could have a massive explosion, something rupture due to the pressure, something like that. But the problems tend to be localized. A problem in a nuclear plant can have all the local problems at the plant, but can also spread radioactive material over a wide area. So the risk of accident is a disadvantage for the nuclear plants. And so there's no nuclear waste in a fossil plant, and there's no or less risk. There's still risk. Anything you do is risky, right? There's still less risk, though, in a fossil-fueled plant. Okay, another thing to note is that a nuclear plant tends to be large and very complicated, so it's expensive to build. Nuclear plants are expensive to build, so that would be a disadvantage. And that's an advantage of a fossil-fueled plant. It's cheaper to build. And so even though a nuclear plant, though, is expensive to build, once it's built, it's pretty cheap to operate. Just a little bit of uranium will power the thing for years and years and years. So it's cheap. A nuclear plant is cheap to operate. A fossil-fueled plant, on the other hand, if you're bringing in coal here to burn, these things burn coal literally by the trainload. So it's expensive to fuel this thing, just because you have to constantly supply it with new fuel. So expensive to fuel, or expensive to operate, that might be a better way to put it. Expensive to operate because of the need to constantly refuel it. Just like you always have to refuel the car because you burn it up. You have to refuel the power plant because you burn it up as well. And as a result, the fossil fueled plant depletes the natural resources. And the nuclear plant does too. It uses up the uranium, but it uses very little. There's very little depletion of resources. So there's not a cut and dry answer to which of these is better. Historically, some people have been very, very opposed to nuclear plants because of the risk of a nuclear accident. But they're not necessarily better. You can see that each of them has some advantages and disadvantages. I'm not necessarily advocating one versus the other here. But I am pointing out that if you one day are in a position, and some of you taking this class very well may be in a position one day to be making decisions of this nature, these are the types of things you'll have to consider. Whether you're going to put in nuclear plants or fossil fueled plants or some other type of power plant.